If you're accusing me of trying to get along with people, well, then I'm guilty. I'm an actor. I do like people to like me. I want people to hire me.
Sure, you wouldn't say boo to a goose. Everybody loves Babe. Come and play around with Babe. Well, I'm sleeping on a couch in the editing suite.
Well, that's how you wanted it. You cared about those things. I didn't.
Well, you can't have. Or you wouldn't have gone off to work with somebody else. I couldn't sleep for days when they told me what you did.
And I couldn't sleep when I did it.
But you still did it. You betrayed me. Betrayed our friendship.
Friendship? We're friends because Hal Roach put us together.
John C. Reilly and Steve Coogan are with us. Hello, gentlemen. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And Steve was just complaining that Mark's not here, so I'm just explaining that Mark doesn't do the interviews. Steve.
Okay, all right.
But if you come into the studio, if you guys came into the studio.
I have been in when Mark's been there.
Yeah, so when you came in for the dinner.
Yeah.
Which is 2017. And then you told us about Richard Gere punching you.
Oh, yeah.
So that was quite a story.
Yeah, he did punch me properly in the face. Punched by a Buddhist. You've got to be very annoying if you punched by a Buddhist. Yeah.
So much for pacifism.
I know.
If I remember right, you had already rapped on this film, on Stan and Ollie, then. So that was certainly what you certainly led us to believe.
Hang on. I'm trying to think. When was we shot this in 2017?
Yeah, and you came in 2017 for the dinner, and I think you just rapped on Stan and Ollie.
Yes, you're right.
Because that's a long lead-up time.
It is. Sorry to interrupt, but yes, you're right. It's 18 months.
Is it quite a relief? Were you quite anxious about how this was going to be received? I mean, to both of you.
I was anxious when we began, whether I'd be up to the task of evoking Oliver Hardy, one of my great heroes. But once we were done with it, I had a pretty good feeling. We had some very emotional days on the film that I thought were some of my better work, and I thought, you never know. It's a miracle when movies work, actually.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that when they work, and then it's a miracle when people actually show up to see them. But I think we both had a pretty good feeling about this one by the time we were finished.
You do all. There's lots of things you're in control of. You try and do those as well as you can. And then there's all the stuff that you're not in control of, which is the sort of nebulous stuff that you never quite know if it's going to fall into place or if it's all going to sort of hang together properly. And so you need a lot of luck. Fortunately, this time, I think things pretty much worked out, I'd say.
John, why did you said that you thought this was some of your better work. Why did you think that?
Whenever you make it like a strong connection with someone on screen, it happens. When I get to an emotional place and you feel like it feels very real to you and you feel very connected to the other actor, the edit can always screw that up. But as an actor, you feel like, well, no, who knows what will happen with the film, but I know that I did my best.
Yeah, it felt authentic. I mean, some actors like to watch back what they've done, but I tend to not do that. If I feel like it went well, I think, well, I don't need to watch it because I can feel that was a good one, so I don't really feel like I need to look at it.
So what's fascinating about the film, one of the many fascinating things, is that this is an aspect of the Stan and Ollie story which a lot of people won't know. So could you just tell us about this period in their life and this section of the story that you're telling?
Well, our film actually starts in the 1930s, in their heyday, right before they make the film Way Out West, which has their very famous dance sequence in front of that saloon that people might know. And then it jumps 15 years to where they end up at the end of their careers when they're old men. And this is a period of time that I actually knew nothing about. Having been a lifelong Laurel and Hardy fan, I was stunned to find out that they did these tours. Towards the end of their lives and when they couldn't get work in Hollywood, they decided, and they weren't making any residuals or box office back end. All they had was salaries while they were making the films, and then that was it. They got not a single penny when their films were on television all those years. So they were in a tough spot, and they needed to make some money. So they went where the love was, which was in England and Scotland and Ireland and Wales.
I suppose it's surprising to think of them as being down on their luck because we associate them as being the comedy megastars, and we associate that with Hollywood superstardom and people being made for life. But as John has just said, that's kind of not the way it was for them.
It was for some people, but not others. And when you grow up, you have this sort of assumption that anyone who's on your television is automatically leading a charmed life. Now, certainly some people like Charlie Chaplin, and who actually Stan Laurel went over to America on the same steamship in 1910 and was his understudy, as a point of fact. But people like Stan Laurel and Buster Keaton were quite canny when it came to business, and they set up their own studios and managed to control what they did and all the rest of it. But Stan and Ollie were not that way. Well, Stan was, but Hal Roach manipulated the two of them in such a way that they never quite got the deal they deserved.
Actually, what happened was Hal Roach, his big star was Harold Lloyd, one of the great silent comedians. Harold Lloyd figured out after a few movies with Hal Roach, wait a minute, I'm doing all the work, I'm writing, I'm directing, you're just collecting the money. What am I doing here? So Harold Lloyd went off and started his own studio. And as a result, Hal Roach was without a star. And so he went, well, all right, how about the fat guy and the skinny guy? With about as much forethought as that, and threw these two strangers together, and thereby created one of the most miraculous partnerships in the history of performing. It's an incredible thing, but they didn't have the kind of cushion in their retirement that some of their contemporaries had, and it's a shame. You know, it's a beautiful thing that the people of England and Scotland and Ireland gave to Laurel and Hardy at the end of their lives. They weren't getting that from any other country. They weren't getting that in America where they both lived. But they came here at a very, vulnerable time in their life, and audiences here reminded them of how beloved they were. It's a beautiful thing, and a natural place to set a retrospective kind of story.
I mean, in Ireland, when they arrived in Ireland in the movie, you see this. They have this great rapturous welcome, and that's borne out by a lot of people who were there.
They agreed to like superstars. Yeah. What was the key for both of you to inhabiting the role? Is it the voice? Is it the walk? What was it?
Well, all that stuff helps. It's sort of cumulative. It's a strange way to go about it because when you play someone who's real, the disadvantage is that you've got to honour this thing that people think they know. The advantage is you've got a lot of source material. So you've got like all their films and you've got some sort of archive stuff. So you've got clues, but you try and assemble all that stuff and figure out who they were. And there are books on them and the like, and you can read all that, but you can read that stuff. But it only gives you so much. The rest of it has to be guesswork on our part. So really we assemble as much stuff as we can, and then you work your way out from that. But now normally when method actors tend to sort of find some kernel of truth or some feeling or try and experience something in a character that's been created and develop the character in a kind of like acorn into an oak tree. But really for us it was a reverse process. It was like we had these external things like their movies and the way they looked and walked and talked and dressed, and we had to sort of use that, all the exterior superficial things and then sort of reverse engineer them and go back into the core of who they were from the outside, if you like.
That was the big pressure going in, was that they're such beloved people. The people that know them very, very well. I mean, I myself have been obsessed with them my whole life. My earliest memories, people ask me, when did you become aware of Laurel and Hardy? I've been aware of Laurel and Hardy as long as I've been aware. There's a constant presence in my life. So there's an enormous pressure there because of that. It's not some forgotten person or some author that no one knows what they spoke like or looked like. There was a big challenge up front, was portraying someone so well known. But once I saw what Mark Coulier, our brilliant prosthetics man, was able to do with the makeup, I thought, well, I'm going to look like him. Now I have to find out who he was. And what's interesting about the two of them is that they were the authors of these characters. They weren't written for them and said, you're going to be this and you're going to be that. They were thrown together and told, come up with an act, boys. I need a star. And so like Steve says, you can kind of reverse engineer their on-screen personalities back to their off-screen personalities. And in Oliver's case, what I found was a real romantic. A lot of what they do in their films is they're kind of ambitious above their station. They're not actually high class, but they're trying to be high class. Oliver's trying to be a gentleman. He's not quite a gentleman. He's kind of a tramp, but he's trying to be this erudite fellow. And the romance, like a lot of the gestures, you try to find the psychological basis for a lot of these, the twiddling of the tie and the walking of the fingers towards someone across the table, this kind of uber romantic, And that was really fun. That was a really fun thing to discover about Oliver, and I realized we have that in common. I actually feel a lot like that myself.
Yeah, I'd echo what John said in terms of like me and Stan, because I found that I had great empathy with Stan, because Stan was a northerner who spent his career writing and performing comedy, which I've done for most of my career. So that felt like a thing that I could identify with and didn't feel like a huge leap for me. But what I discovered about Stan was that he really, unlike Oliver, he lived to work, and Oliver was the reverse. Oliver worked to live. So Stanley sort of sacrificed himself on the altar of his art in a way, and as such probably was far less happy a person than Oliver.
What's interesting about these guys, and one of the reasons I think maybe they didn't get their due when they were alive, is they didn't quite see themselves as geniuses. The world wasn't telling them in the 1950s, you're geniuses. You know, there was a nostalgia for them. Oh, yes, I remember those films. They were so funny. Now, 100 years later, since they made their work, we realize those guys were geniuses. But they were working in a medium at the time where they took old films and turned them into guitar picks. You know, film legacy and film history, at the time they were making films, they thought they were just try to be funny right now. There was no thought about the future or some big legacy, you know? So it's a really interesting thing to do now, to encourage people to hold them in as high regard as some of their peers, because they didn't quite get that cachet that Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton.
And we get the impression watching the film that that's certainly how they felt about it as well.
Yeah, they were very humble men. You know, they were doing these movies during the Depression in America and in the lead up to World War II in Europe. Like, they came from nowhere. They were plucked out of nowhere by Hal Roach and thrown together. So I think through their entire lives, to their very last days, they never forgot how bad it can be for an everyday person. And they realized what a gift they were giving, the joy they were giving to people, they felt was like a kind of sacred mission, you know? You can see it in how much effort they put in to staying connected with their audiences off stage.
Yeah, I think that, just add to that what we sort of discovered really is it made me look at comedy in a different way, you know, from the outside, because I was examining it from the outside at some point, looking at Laurel and Hardy, is that comedy is often seen as trivial because it makes you laugh. In actual fact, it's a legitimate art form along with anything else, and in some ways it's got great power, but because we associate it with laughter, we associate it with somehow being lowbrow, and in actual fact it's quite a great craft.
And before we run out of time, I don't know if this is going to work, but there is much joy to be had in this film. It's a fantastic drama, it's very funny, it's very moving, very profound, but the laughs are profound as well. Could you describe the double door routine?
Have a sort of bash at it. It's what I mean.
Well, I mean, I think it's people will watch that and go, "This is the essence of them," and it's wonderful. And I just wonder if you could describe a bit of it for the radio.
It's sort of what's important to remember is that Stan and Ollie came out of silent movies, and they very cleverly, when they went into the era of sound, didn't jettison the physical side of what they did, which is what made them funny without sound. And what we did when we were doing their live stage work was try to emulate the style of what they did. And so the double door routine, which is what we call it, that you're referring to, it was actually something we devised with Toby Sedgwick that was in the style of what they did. And I'm really pleased with it, because I think that they would, if they were alive, that they would look at it and go, yeah, we do that sort of thing. And it was basically...
In fact, there's one movie where they try to rescue a woman who's about to commit suicide by jumping in a river, and she follows them back to their hotel, and there's a double door routine, but with 2 elevator doors. So there are echoes in their films. Almost all the bits that we do in our film are echoed in some way in their actual film work.
What physically happens is that I come out of a railway waiting room as Stan, and John as Ollie comes out just at the wrong time. So we keep missing each other in the most incredible of ways, that is all about a series of almost impossible coincidences, a physical coincidence.
I mean, in a way, it's a distillation of like a perfect Laurel and Hardy routine, because that's what they did. You know, some people would do something like, you're not looking the right way, someone turns with a huge piece of lumber and whacks you on the back of the head. Then you see where the lumber came from and whacks you on the other side of the head. And you think like, well, when you're watching Laurel and Hardy, you think like, well, he's been whacked on the head 3 times. He can't possibly be whacked on the head again. And then he gets whacked on the head 5 more times.
Yeah.
Like, they were the masters of taking that kind of misdirection and, like this thing, missing someone in a train station, and then we miss each other about 12 times during the course of the act, which is what they did. They were masters of the comedy of escalation. They were masters of the comedy of contrast, and they were just masters of comedy, let's face it.
And the movie is delightful, and we appreciate your time with us, Steve Coogan. John C. Reilly, thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.
My pleasure.